if you can. I'll be disappointed in you. Almost slipping. Okay, well, it's 5. We're going to start because there's a lot of shit to go over. Okay. We're going to go through the normal slide thing over at meetings. And if people have a question, I'm looking at the live chat, as well as there is a hangout that is currently me. What's like Thomas? Brendan, and Zach. So you do you. I will mute people if they just start hurling shit in the middle of meeting. But other than that, I don't, just talk out however much you want. And I encourage people to also mute themselves if they're in stream and they're like not doing anything, because then we don't hear your feedback or just generic noise from shuffling things. Hello there. Okay. Sorry, wait, what?
No one talked.
I heard half of those words. No, Roberto jumped in, talked, and then left. And
no.
If that was unclear, feel free to put it in chat. So we're gonna start. Because I'm watching YouTube chat. So, all right. And on that note, if anybody has any questions, put them in YouTube chat. So, or here. Meeting recording notice. This is kind of implied this go around. 2 recent competitions, VT Summit and Cyberdog CTF. VT Summit was 2 teams: Zay Wilson, Steve, Brandon Wong. Oh, it's that Brandon, isn't it? Okay, yeah, it is. Never mind. Brendan and Brandon are now here. Okay, Brandon Wong, Kothan, and Matt Burke was on it, but he had to pull out at the last minute. The other team was myself, Joe Tan, Paul Benoit, Tyler, and Chuck. VT, it was first and second by a wide margin. We were basically just trying to kill each other, and Tyler and Chuck struck like a 500-point problem, and that like ended it. Because they realized every RE problem was worth like 50 points out of like 1,000, and they were like, shit, they should be worth, so they like overjacked them up towards the end and made them worth a ton. But at least they were worth a ton for everybody, so I guess it's fair. UMBC Cyberdog CTF, 3rd place. I don't have their names on here, tragically, because I pulled the picture at the last minute. But 3rd place is really good when you consider VT was in Virginia and UMBC was in Maryland, and it is very hard to not get brutally washed in Maryland for a competition, because UMBC and UMD are both extremely good teams. Also of notice is CCDC was during this VT Summit weekend, so a lot of the good clubs, I guess, were doing that. So I'll still take the W. VT won't stop fucking doing puzzles at all of their competitions. There was one in another room. It was a physical puzzle that you had to lay out and actually get a flag with, so that was a weird one. There were a ton of red herrings, like people would just draw lines between stuff and fake it. And across competitions, not just VT Summit, people have gotten used to doing different kinds of red herrings. Cyberfusion did it, where you're trying to trick people into thinking the flag's over here when it's not. Upcoming events. Crypto Party got rescheduled, so if you want to jump in on that, go to cryptoparty.gmu.io. UMD CTF last year, it was 9 to 5. It's April 14th. And we'll get details on that. They literally told me they would write me a personal email for our club with all the information they can possibly find on the CTF like this week. So we'll get plenty on that soon. We're going to shuffle teams around on that one, so beginners don't want to kill themselves when we like stack teams and they don't get anything done. So we're going to try to make it more educational and less shitty for new people this time around. Swamp CTF is online. I couldn't even tell you the date right now. I'm sure you could look it up, but I couldn't even tell you the date. I know it's coming up, and we're mostly blind on it because they really don't tell you much about it before it happens. I think it's UCF's. I don't remember. So really, really killing it in the knowing about competitions department. what we already covered. This is part 2 of a series. The first part was on recon and scanning, getting information about a target site, finding stuff about it, tools like Deerbuster and DNS Dumpster and Developer Console and whatever tool it was that we used to brute force domains, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, so Roberto said March 29th. I'm assuming that's for Swamp CTF. So that is definitely coming up. That's like a week from now. University of Florida. Okay, cool. General setup. There's a lot we're going to cover, so I'm sorry if this runs a little long. General learning resources, set up good sites to be at, cross-site scripting, SQL injection, using SQL map for that, because I think a lot more people in this club know the theory behind stuff like blind SQL injection than how to actually use it. Command injection, web shells / file upload, file include, deserialization. Basically, the variety of which we're going to go over this stuff is going to dramatically vary. Learning sources, we're going to actually set up. Cross-site scripting, we're going to at least look at / demo. SQL injection, we're going to demo, and we're going to use SQL map. Stuff like insecure deserialization and server-side template injection is a little bit more advanced, so we're going to talk about insecure. We're not even going to tell you like the full throughout thing of it. We're just going to tell you what to look for and at which point you should Google it in the CTF. And server-side template injection, we'll talk about the theory of it. WP scan, I have a scan demo of it. I was going to live demo it, but I tried a GNU website and it came out hilariously vulnerable, so I figured I shouldn't demo it live. And because my first pick was vulnerable. And exfiltration, so some fun ways to get data out of a server afterwards. So there's a ton of stuff you can use to get introduced to this kind of stuff. There are a number of, there's I think 2 categories of problems related to web, but one punches are especially fun. I did a number of them and I really enjoy them. I should preface this with go.gmu.edu/cc training as a reminder. Put the direct link to the slideshow. Now I'm not going to put the direct link because that's going to take time. But in random, I put our CC training link there under presentations, under whatever season we're in, spring 2018, under green track is where this presentation is. So if you see commands like these and you want to not have to copy them down from a stream, there's only like 2 of them, but you can have them. XSS game, specifically for cross-site scripting, it's a little bit of a playground. You can you get progressively more difficult cross-site scripting problems, and if you successfully execute cross-site scripting, it says nice job, next match, next match, next match, and at the end it gives you a ASCII art cake. I think One Punch got through all of it, and One Punch, if you're still there and you want to share your blog in the chat, I would support that because you got, I think it was write-ups for like level 5 onward. Game of Hacks is a fun one. They give you a snippet of vulnerable code and they tell you which vulnerability is this, and they give you like 4 options and you pick one and you just try to see how far along you can get with that. You can also challenge friends with it. So yeah, it is quizzy, but it's fun. Damn Vulnerable Web App, killing it in the typo department. I'm a contributor of that. It's very old. It has like 90s style interface, but it's still pretty good. I told people to have Docker and before this, and if you do, you can run this to get Damn Vulnerable Web App set up on port 80. It'll download things. If you run, I know if you run both of these, it downloads about 1 gigabyte worth, but it downloads it in chunks, so it should be less painful. One starts it on port 80 and the other one starts it on port 81. Hackazon is another app you can hack at. It has, I don't think it's necessarily more modern vulnerabilities, but it's in a more modern setting. Damn Vulnerable Web App will hand it to you, say, this is command injection. Here is a hint on how to do it. Here is the source code. Here is everything you need to do it. A little bit more, hold your hand. Hackazon is a marketplace that just has a ton of vulnerabilities, and you're supposed to just go crazy on it. It's important to note you do need this -n. I tried to make this command shorter and tried to knock stuff off of it, and it did not treat me well. OWASP, they are not a group. I believe it's Open Web Application Security Project, but they have a wiki for like every web vulnerability and in-depth explanation in multiple languages you can think of, including releasing a top 10. But first, we're going to go over key terms. Key terms. A session. A session is a browsing session tracked by the server. Usually it's a login session. Theoretically, you can start a session for a user without them being logged in, but it's not really valuable. Session ID. It's a value that is sensitive. It's stored in a cookie on the browser. It's used to identify the user back to the server for the session. So this server has no way of knowing, well, what is this? How am I supposed to know what browser / what requests are what user? That's what the session ID does, is it determines what, as you're browsing, it sends it back to the server. And this is this user, basically. That's a very dry, rundown version of it. It could not even correlate to users, but that's how it's generally used. Password hashes. It's a one-way encrypted password of a user. It's hashed, if you've ever heard of hashing. Cannot be decrypted, but it can be brute forced. Usually, especially in CTFs, it can be easily brute forced. There are a wide variety of technologies out there to make them not easily brute forced, or implement them. Session hijack. If you steal somebody's session ID and apply it to your browser through a cookie editor or something, you get their session, and as such, you're effectively logged in as them. Keeping in mind, sessions expire after a certain point. That's why if you leave your browser open and come back to it 3 days later, you're not going to have your, what's it called? You're not going to have your login session. I turned off my camera. I don't know why. Whatever. Whoa, what is going on? Okay, we're good. Key terms. Real world perspective. Okay, yeah, I am on screen. Let's figure this out. Face. Did I kill my screen share? It's fine. It's fine. Here we go. There we go. We're back to normal. Crushed it. Let me wait till the YouTube stream catches up, because that was a little bit of a cluster F. I don't know why I just avoided cursing there. Anyway, real world perspective, OAuth. Every year they come out with the top 10 risks. We're going to go over some of these. Some of them we are not. They're all important. Some of them are more technical and some of them aren't. Like broken authentication could cover approximately 1 million things. Sorry, there we go. I love some of the other ones. Security misconfiguration, insufficient logging is something Paul and I see at work a lot. But these are the ones we're going to go over because they relate especially to CTFs. Sorry, I'm tweaking people's volume so I don't get too much feedback on my end. Okay, so cross-site scripting, referred to as XSS a lot. You have to run your JavaScript on another user's browser. Whoever zipped their backpack, I encourage you to, because I can hear like your feedback, unless you're talking. There are 3 kinds. The first 2 are what actually matter. Reflected is sent to the server and returned back to whoever visits that. So it's injecting JavaScript through usually the URL. There are other ways to do it, but it requires an insane amount of user intervention to get them to initiate attack through anything other than basically the URL. So you inject JavaScript through the URL, you send it to somebody, they go, oh, google.com, that's a trusted domain. They click it, but it has a JavaScript payload in it. It injects it into their HTML basically and runs it. Stored is something like, say they have you set your first name and you set your first name to JavaScript and they visit your web page and it executes that JavaScript. That's an example of stored because it's storing your first name in a database somewhere or a file or something. Significantly more dangerous. Screw with, I don't know. Just it's better. Then DOM-based is using existing JavaScript, HTML. It's much less common. Well, that's not true. Facebook just got pwned by something that was basically DOM-based. I encourage you to look it up. They just got a cross-site scripting vulnerability. But yeah, so those are the three kinds. Reflected, you don't generally see in competitions because how on earth would you replicate that in a competition? You have to send them the link. Stored is what you usually see, and it's usually in the form of have a complaint, enter your complaint here, and an admin will check it as soon as possible. But this is an example of reflected, at least. This is a little bit of overkill, but it's basically saying if name sent as a GET request, which I don't know if I mentioned, but sorry, requires GET and POST. GET is usually non-sensitive, sent in the URL. POST is often sensitive. It's form data, login data, etc. So say you have a GET request and it's your name. It would look like something like google.com name or page.php, even though Google's not even PHP as far as I know. Question mark name equals Michael. That's where GET requests usually come into play. So the idea is you can put JavaScript there, and echoing is putting it out to the page. So you can put script alert one and script tag, and it'll execute. So let me give a live example. I just fucked up my notes. Oh well. So stored, you can do Michael Bailey, and you can do this on Dan Vulnerable Web App if you followed that Docker command. Message, script, alert, live test, since JavaScript is usually wrapped in script tags, end script, signed guestbook. In a shocking twist, Chrome actually blocked it, but it actually still went through. And you'll notice right here, the message it's incredibly small font, but the message is script live test script. So that's cross-site scripting, or that's stored. Reflected is what is your name? Or they expect you to say Michael. Hello, Michael. Well, you can do alert one script. And in 99% of the cases, fun fact, Chrome will block this. So I bet, yeah, Chrome blocked by XSS Auditor. So a lot of reflective is mitigated right nowadays by browsers. You can still usually get away with doing one moment, please. Completely unrelated to the talk. No, just kidding. Pay no mind to my John Cena. There we go. Now we have a 4S. You can still usually inject content through it because they care less about that. So this is the second time we've injected John Cena to a page through cross-site scripting at Mason CC. A little known fun fact there. But this isn't necessarily cross-site scripting. I think this would be classified as content injection. It can be fun if you get creative and inject another page that's a login page. It's good for phishing, I guess. And it's often used to try to evade the auditor. But if I had a good auditor evasion, I would be probably loaded because I would sell it. Let me go back because I'm a dummy and I went straight from the slideshow to here. Again, if anybody has any questions, I'm looking at the chat and I'm somewhat looking at the Google Hangout. I've had to mute a couple people throughout the stream, but I think they've jumped on and off. So I don't know who, but I had to mute people. So if I'm not listening to you, then it's in the YouTube chat. Also, noteworthy is if you're familiar with code but you're not familiar with PHP, the periods are used to concatenate stuff, similar to how you see pluses. Stealing cookies it can get quite easy. Difficulty, but ideally you would use a web server. But all you need is something listening on a certain port, which is what the NC, it's called netcat command, can do for you. This is what I have to run in Mac to do it, but in normal netcat, I think there's a traditional and a OpenBSD kind. I think those are the two kinds. You run this to start something on port 8000. It's better to do it on a proper web server, but if you don't know how to Linux, then you might not know how to set that up. Servers for this used to exist online, like request bin, and those got taken down because apparently some asshole kept DDoSing them. There's a lot of ways to do it in more advanced ways, but we're going to show a really, really simple way, which is by literally referencing an image. And then when you reference that image, it's going to pass all the cookies and details to that server. So in mobile web app, you actually are logged in. It's albeit really bad. It's admin password. You are logged in. Our request bin is down. If you go to it now, it will redirect you to their GitHub, which has it in the README saying they got abused, which based on issues, it sounds like they just kept getting DDoSed. Because I don't know why the hell you would DDoS request bin, because they're pretty harmless. But so yeah, this is I already cross-site scripted it, but we're going to, in my case, I'm just going to do localhost because that'll route. But in a competition, you'd use your IP address. Do netcat -L, like I said, I'm on Mac, so you don't need a -P. But now we're just listening on port 8000. And if you tried to reference a thing at port 8000 and anyone tried to visit that page, you would see their cookies. Some of these are useless because I'm accessing localhost, and that's just what they're stored. But these are the two you see for mobile web app: security low and PHP session ID. Session ID is the important bit. So if you had a cookie editor browser extension, you would edit your PHP session ID to become their PHP session ID, and in many cases, it will, sorry, I'm getting my phone blown up. In many cases, it will log you in as them. There are ways to mitigate it, but again, we're in CTF, so in many cases, they don't try to mitigate it. There are ways to make it only. There's different flags for cookies to further secure them. SQL injection, you can inject your own code is a weird way to say it, but SQL being a database language, it's structured query language for accessing MySQL, MariaDB, PostgreSQL, I believe, databases, and querying them for data. There are two major kinds, blind and normal. So take the relatively simple demo at the bottom, get the input, which is, this is a bad example, so let me go to live. So you're just looking to search for a user ID. So you search for one, and first name admin, surname admin. But what it's doing is it's saying select first name, last name, where the user ID is this. If you supply it with something that's not just plain text, it might panic. So an easy way to tend to check for SQL injection is to just throw like characters that would traditionally throw this query off, which is like a single quote or something like that. You have an error in your SQL syntax. So this means it is normal. I believe if you do the same in blind, nothing. But if you do it in normal, you'll get an error. So blind being they don't return you output, whether it worked or not, they don't return you output. It's just working in the back end and behind the scenes. The idea is you can put more SQL here to do whatever you want with the database. So or 1 equals 1 drop tables is the common example. I forgot what it's called, Bobby tables. So did you really name your sum Robert, single quote, blah, 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 drop table students? Oh yes, little Bobby tables we call them. That's usually the meme about SQL injection. But that's the idea of it, is you can append other statements or you can run subqueries. Depends on your SQL knowledge, but you can inject database into you can inject database language into an existing statement. And I'm going to demo these in SQL Map, which a lot of people consider a script kiddie tool, but is extremely useful in CTFs and other stuff. Blind, there are two major ways, time-based and Boolean-based, to exploit it. The short of it is, if the page is returning different content, depending on whether the query returned true or false or something, you can say return nothing if the database name starts with A, and if it returns nothing, then it starts with A. It assumes something different will happen depending on conditions of the statement. Time-based is if the database starts with A, sleep for a second, half a second. If it takes a second, half a second, the database name starts with A. You can see how you would script this to figure out a database length or a database name. You can then drill down into tables, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to start learning more about databases, and you could start leaking out individual data from databases. So the reason SQL Map is so beautiful is because you can pretty much perfectly understand the logic behind SQL injection or blind SQL injection at least, without having any clue how to actually do it. So we're going to do SQL Map. You can install SQL Map if you want. Don't be an idiot and use it elsewhere because it's very noisy. And we're going to run it on localhost. Now, an important detail is we are logged in. So I am going to go to a tab I have because I have an extension, but you may not have this tab. Actually, no. I'm going to go to the console. I'm going to do document cookie. And since we mentioned our session earlier, this information is basically, namely the PHP session ID, is what ties us to our login. Otherwise, this is just going to hammer the login page really, really hard and isn't that useful. Even though I think there are exploits in this specific case in the login page. So fuck that up. While I'm here, I'm going to remove the extraneous stuff. But yeah, that's the idea. You have to provide it your login if it's an authenticated, your session if it's an authenticated session, to make it so it can get through. This quote auto-escaped it, but for anybody familiar with Linux, you're going to want to single quote it, whatever you can do to make it not blow up in terminal with strings or characters like the and sign. You do -p to specify what parameter you think is vulnerable. In our case, we think ID is. Submit hasn't really done anything for us, but ID is what's like actually juicy and throwing bugs and et cetera, et cetera. So ID, it was cached. So let me just wipe my whole SQL map cache. It's testing if the URL is stable, testing if everything's right. It identified that it looks like it's MySQL. Do you want to skip testing for other databases? You do this if you're relatively confident. Definitely confident. I know I haven't read this, but I know what it's talking about. Do you want to include all tests for extending provided level and risk values? Yeah, it's just talking about risk. Yes. We don't really care how noisy it is because it's also, fun fact, FCPS just closed, so we might be next. So it's testing a bunch of queries. Time-based blind is what we know it actually is, but we're going to keep going. Get parameter is vulnerable. That's what we like to see. I hit enter, by the way, up here because the uppercase in most of these tools is the default. So I'm going with defaults, but and also it's nice that they tell you the literal stuff like queries they're doing. So get parameter ID is vulnerable. Do you want to keep testing others? I don't see why we would if we know it's vulnerable. And it says, cool, it knows it's vulnerable. This is where a lot of people get screwed up. People go, cool, it's vulnerable. I tested it with SQL Map. I don't know what to do next. There are multiple ways you can proceed. You can, depending on the situation, get a literal operating system shell with this. It depends on a lot of things in that case. But if the server's super vulnerable, you can do --OS shell, and it'll try to dump you to a shell. OS pwn will try to give you something like Meterpreter for Metasploit. There's all kinds of stuff. You can do dump, but it's extremely noisy, and it'll run a million commands and slowly dump everything out of MySQL. What we're going to do, because we're actually sane, is do DBs. That will dump the databases. It's doing blind, so it makes sense why it'd be a little slow. But it found 4 databases. Then we can do D and supply the database. Let's say we want password for users. Do uppercase D, supply the database, tables. I'll drill down further into individual tables. This was literally at VT Summit. And also, I've been ranting, so I'm going to reiterate. If anybody has any questions, I encourage you to go in either YouTube chat or Google Hangout. Tables, users. So we do G users. Oh, so we specify tables, but we didn't actually say what to do with it. Dump. All the information about the table, including its entries. Again, it makes sense why it'd be slow because it's blind and it's doing time-based, so it's waiting. You can speed it up with threads like it says in the warning, but I have no problem waiting a second for this. Because I don't think there's that many. I hope there's not that many. Come on. Come on. If this actually messed up, then that's going to be so sad. Let's try that again. That was weird. We're going to run it again. It recognized that it was a partial value and then finished it, so that's nice. I don't know why it's choking so hard, but the idea is you could use this for blind. And then you get something like this, and it ends up being formatted weird, but this is how it's actually formatted in MySQL, like when you go into a database or into a database server. You end up with actual entries and password hashes and all that fun stuff. Let's do it with SQL injection just to show what it'd look like faster, and hopefully it'll mess up less for us. I think you're supposed to give it a known working entry. So let's try that first. You can just put it like that if you wanted to, but my terminal is being annoying, so we're going to just put that. What did I do? URL DBs. Oh wait, cookies. We're going to borrow the ones from up here. That's cookie, not cookies. Whoops. Looks like the back end of SQL. Yep. Do you want to do SQL tests with certain risk? Sure. Running all kinds of MySQL. Error-based being, is it returning errors? All kinds of different kinds. It's vulnerable. Do you want to test other ones? No, because if it's vulnerable, we're good to go. Okay. It knows it's vulnerable. Get databases. Works pretty instantly because it's not blind. So it just can query directly. It doesn't have to do all kinds of weird stuff. The downloadable web app. We already know it's users. We can skip that step. But and what's it called? Dump. I don't want to crack anything. and it pretty much instantly dumped all the passwords, names, user IDs, etc. So SQL Map's really good for testing SQL injection, and that's the general idea of it. A lot more people know how to know what blind SQL injection is than they know how to test it, and a lot of it, if you're not using tools, is predicated on your knowledge of SQL, which a lot of people don't have. We went over it. SQL Map used the VT Summit successfully, dumped a flag in a database, and yeah, I would show you the OS shell, but even Dan Vulnerable Web App in its current setting isn't vulnerable enough to use OS shell, because it has to be a combination of the web app's vulnerable, web server's vulnerable, the actual underlying server and how it interacts with the web server is vulnerable. There's like 100 conditions to make the OS shell work. Command injection. We're going to breeze through some of these. Similar to SQL injection, but it's outright commands. So the idea is you give it an IP address to ping. We're just going to do localhost because that's fastest. And it goes, yeah, here's your ping results. So it's assuming you're giving it an IP address. That's a common thing you're going to notice with a lot of these vulnerabilities is it's just trusting the user to give decent input. For anybody who knows Linux, what if we do something like localhost ;ls? In this, it would be 11.0.0.0.0.1 ls. So then it does an ls in its current directory, and you see the listed files. This is a weird example. You don't generally go to sites, and it's just like, here's a pinging tool. But I'm heavily involved in the PHP community, and a lot of people I see who do this don't know how to, for instance, write data to a file. So they'll use cat or something in the command line and use data to a file using that. Just really bad programming practice, but that's usually where you see it. Oftentimes it's not outputted, and that's where we'll get our data exfiltration example in later. But yeah, similar stuff like file operations, accessing other servers, etc., can lead to command injection. File upload is when people don't want to check their uploads, and you can upload whatever PHP you want. It's very prevalent in the real world, or they insufficiently check the upload. So I wrote my own, and I'm going to download it now. It's basically the web version of a virus. Downloads shell.php. Okay. So you can upload whatever you want. They're expecting usually a profile picture or something, and we're going to be mean people and do shell.php. Upload. And in many cases, they don't tell you where it is, but I've seen the most common is you see profile pictures, and then it tries to load your profile picture on your profile page, and it's a broken link, and it goes, this broke, but you can still go to the HTML and view where it loaded. So ours is there, and when you visit it, it's PHP, so it executes. Mine was a weird shell for a weird use case, so don't worry about it. But let me review how it's done. I believe one moment, please. There you go. So we did an ls in the name bar. I clicked remember me and then did the member, which is how my shell works because it's obfuscated, because why not? Because I wanted it to look like somebody's actual final project, because why not? But if you did like a who am I, check, run, data, which is the default user web servers run under, so that makes sense. etc password, which for the Linux people knows that isn't necessarily the actual passwords, it's just user data. That's their etc password file. So the idea is you shouldn't be able to upload stuff like PHP files, because then they can lead to executable code. And an easy way actual real professional groups get around this is they just all together upload files in an area that's not executable, such as just another directory entirely that has nothing to do with their web server, web root. So, because then PHP won't execute to it in the way you get to it. Common in defense competitions, they'll throw one in a web app, and like 2 hours in, the red team will smash it. These are names for common web shells. C99 is a little more bare bones. B374K is like a full-fledged, you have a MySQL interface over here, you have a file browser over here. People get really creative for it. If it's an established one like one of these and you download it, certain antivirus providers will actually just outright delete it because it's so close to a virus. I will say, in a CTF context, don't be an idiot about it. If you upload a shell in the root called shell.php, and I've literally done this multiple times in competition before, I can just visit shell.php and I don't have to actually do the CTF problem. So don't give the other team an easy edge by being an idiot. Another thing is, it depends on how noisy you want to be. B374K wouldn't be used in a lot of real world scenarios because it's like unpacking and it's a massive file, and there's multiple ways in which a company properly auditing themselves would catch it. File include, when Hammer relies on user input to fetch files. What does that look like for Dan on mobile web app? Let me close this. File inclusion. There's a remote file inclusion and there is a local file inclusion. Local means access files from the server. This is, or local means, yes. I think one is you can access from the server. I believe that's local. Remote means I can provide it a link and it will download and execute that link, which usually leads to something like a PHP web shell, where you're providing them a link to, let's say, this. What I just downloaded is my shell. They'll download it, execute it, and then you can visit it. So file inclusion is common when you look in the GET requests and you see it's actually pulling down a page. So you can exploit this by trying to access literally anything else other than the page they're trying to get you to access. etc password. It's not pretty formatted because that's not how HTML works. It would be in page source. And you'll see the etc password file. There are multiple ways they try to obfuscate this. This whole talk is just a brush over of everything. Null terminated characters or null characters will mess with it, etc., etc. There's different ways they'll screw up file inclusion. But the idea is they just get the page you request and then they do something like echo file get contents to the page. The source code I pulled up is super overcomplicated because it's doing like 4 different scenarios and all that. So I didn't include the full one here. Insecure serialization, insanely technical. It can result in remote execution. It's involved in creating objects in PHP. If you see user input like post or get in functions, like I think they're called magic functions, like construct or deconstruct or destruct in PHP, probably a deserialization vulnerability. You're going to want to Google how to actually go through with this. How it would take a while to go through with this for me right now. And OWASP has it heavily documented, for instance. Java has a tool out for theirs called Java Serial Killer. And yeah, just Google these symptoms if you see it in the CTF. Server-side template injection. Templating is very common. Our website uses templating. Impact can vary, but the idea is instead of saying put Michael Bailey as the title of my profile, they'll say put bracket name and then someone else you'll specify Michael Bailey. Problem is if they're interpreting the actual templating logic on the server side and you put something like bracket 7 times 7 and it returns 49, then they're interpreting the user input logic on the server side, which can vary depending on the actual template engine. Ours is like zero impact because we're on GitHub Pages. We don't really accept user input, and we're using, I forgot what it's called. It's Ruby's engine. It doesn't matter, but Ruby likes using the percent signs. And yeah, the idea is you give it that kind of logic. Sorry, I'm brushing over all this. There's a lot to hit though. Outdated components. People never update their engines, whether it's WordPress, Joomla, Drupal. You can scan with, I don't know why this is blank, but Joom Scan, WP Scan is really popular. It's run by the same guy as Dan Mobile Web App. It's in Ruby, and I really like it. For smaller apps, WebCal 1.2.4, for instance, has showed up in CTFs multiple times. It has exploit code on the internet. Corey referenced recently exploitDB. exploitDB has working Python exploit code for WebCal 1.2.4. They're usually correlated to a CVE. Some of you know what CVEs are, some of you don't. They're identifiers for vulnerabilities. But you can Google CVE, and there's usually a proof of concept tool for that. You can chop it up. It's usually in something like Python, and you can get a working exploit out of it. That comes in the form of code execution and WebCal's and then get command execution. It varies. The moral of the story is to research their version number. This S should be uppercase. CMS is content management system. But mostly people don't know what they're doing. So I picked an example out, like I said at the beginning of the talk. It was a GMU subdomain, and I was like, oh, I'll scan it for shits and giggles, and that'll be my example. 3 critical vulnerabilities. I blotted press user group. Don't hack it, please. Thank you. But yeah, so that's an example of a scan. I cut it here, but it basically has like 53 blobs giving you references for different vulnerabilities. And like I said, you'd then follow up on those references and it'd figure out. I know not only do I not condone people hacking this, but it's not a pretty target. Nobody's going to be impressed with it. Exploitation, getting goodies on the system, to steal things. Now that we have, for instance, command injection. Using command injection, you might not be in a full operating system. You could be in somebody's container, a virtual machine. VT Summit had a virtual machine with like a lot of stuff to go with on there to get data out. I use curl and wget. A lot of people don't leverage those tools. Very easy, but you got to worry about. Also funny is I didn't change this title from another presentation, so I guess I have. You have to worry about how you're going to get it over the wire and how you're going to format the data. It's kind of a 2-part thing. Who the hell are you? If you're root, your life is so much easier, but you probably are not root when you exploit it. Are you injecting PHP code? Are you in a shell? Odds are, if you're in a shell, you don't have bash. You just have bin sh in Linux, which in bash. Can you pivot to something else like sh to bash or PHP code to shell code? What are the differences? And you need to keep that in mind so you can keep in mind how it's going to be a pain in the ass to. So there's a bunch of different methods by which you can exfil. These are the 5 most common ones I see in CTFs. Raw encrypted, open a client somewhere and a server somewhere. It's encrypted and it's fast. It's not subtle necessarily because you just see a bunch of SSL, possibly mutual auth, data going on a random port. It's probably going to raise some eyebrows. but if depending on the CTF, you might not care. VT Summit didn't have active defenders, so you do you. Raw unencrypted, fast yes, everything else no. Netcat, HTTP and HTTPS, curl or wget will do this for you. The big pain in the ass is getting HTTPS going as far as certificates go. You will have a self-signed certificate, in which case you have to do all kinds of flags to make sure your data is DNS, very slow. Will anybody care if you're making DNS queries? No. So DNS is a tricky beast, and it's up there. I'm going to use Dig in this example to exfiltrate a ton of data. You can use something called DNS cat. So you'll have is, in this example, Dig and Bash. I'm going to do the example. You don't want to transmit data with spaces and new lines and all that because that gets annoying. So you're going to want either base 64, whatever data you're getting, and hex, you're going to want to, again, cut spaces and new lines out to get it over the wire easier. Example of a really, really cut and dry thing you could do. You could send a web request to evilserver.com/, and then when you do this parentheses thing, it's going to evaluate this command and then put the output wherever this is. And base64. And then if you run evilserver.com, you can go look at your logs and unbase64 it, and then you have a file listing of the target. Example. This is the payload I'm using. It's an absolute monster. I'm not going to go over it too hard, but the idea is base64 the password file spaces, count how many characters it is, leak everything out in 50 bytes at a time. A64 chunk of 50 bytes or less. .google.com at a DNS server we run and stuff, or get the output and stuff, and then move up 50 characters and then repeat. Now, cutting it right under the wire for an hour, so I apologize if any of this was dry, but this is a really, really, really dense, something that I heard a million times. We're going to open Kali, which is going to be our attacker. Going. So let me clean that up. Out. What we're going to do is we're going to start DNS Chef, which is a proxy. I just learned about this redirect request to something like 8.8.8.8, which is Google's DNS. And so then ideally, if you're querying valid valid domains, you'll get actual response. And we're going to log everything to an out file so we can parse it out and get pretty base64 stuff. Taking out all the output like active and down, and stripping, getting just the base64 blob out of that URL is all it's really doing. Right now, there's not much to be seen because it hasn't gotten any version of this. We're going to go to command injection, and it's base64 encode. That's how I'm going to do sh to bash in this case. The reason I base64 encoded is because it's a script and has all kinds of special characters and might throw it off if you just do it in plain text. Because go figure, it's DNS, but you see all the queries. Hold on. I pulled the wrong data. Whoops, yikes. Let's encode our payload. One moment. Okay, there's other try everything in my history because it's actually full in different files, so it is what it is. Trying a bunch of different payloads because I have a bunch in my history, so sorry. But yeah, we just ran it. One of them probably, it's sad. Oh, it broke. Worth noting. Actually, let me. Yeah. So password files. This is the password file from our damn vulnerable web app box, and we exfiltrated it over DNS and their network requests. That is everything I've got for you guys. The reason it's weird, you guys, like for instance, at VT Summit, they had all kinds of network rules in place blocking a wide variety of issues like reaching out in attack E section to attack R section, et cetera, et cetera. If anybody has any questions, I'm in YouTube chat. Question by 6, I'll cut the stream. Actually, yeah, no, I'll cut the stream at 6. If not, then thank you for coming. And there's only one contested. It is Zossman versus Chuck. I'm just going to have them add a blob to their ballot. Yeah, that's all we're going to do. Brandon Wong is going to be our secretary, so congratulations to Brandon. Re-election, and Brandon is running for election. And yeah, that's I'm at a blob. Ballots should go out in Slack today. I should have announced that. Whoops. So actually, people have to join or get connected. So if you're still on the stream, join or get connected. I think search for Mason Competitive Cyber, join our roster, and then you can vote. I'll probably do that. All it up. If there's any questions, feel free to hit me up in Slack. The meeting. So thank you. You can't do it at 5:59. It's cheating. It is 6. We'll see you guys later. Thank you.